Hey everyone, my name is Meredith over at A Genuine Girl podcast, and today I have the very special honor of interviewing Katy for her 100th episode of Collegehood Advice. I think it's crazy that Katy has already hit 100 episodes, and I am just so proud of all of the work that she's been doing. She gives such great advice to college students, and I feel like today it's time to turn the tables and let her kind of take on the role of the interviewee and give us some tips and tricks and her own personal experiences so we can learn more about her life. So with that said, I am here with Katy now. Say hello, Katy.
Hi, you guys. Thank you, Meredith, for doing this and for the kind introduction. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
no problem. I'm so glad that I have this opportunity and can kind of be the guest host today. We have some great questions here for you, and I thought it would be good to just hop right into things and start getting to know you a little bit better. So the first thing that I kind of want to center this episode around is, of course, college, because Collegehood Advice is all about college, advice for college students. But as a college student who has been listening to your episodes and hearing all of this great advice, I sometimes wonder about your own personal college experiences and how life really was for you when you were in college and where all of this advice you have, where it really came from. So I thought it would be cool to start by having you talk a little bit about your own college experience when you were our age and what the good parts were, bad parts, and how you ultimately left college feeling.
I'll start with saying that my parents are from New England, and my dad has a GED. My mom has a high school education. My mom stayed home, and my dad worked his way up in his job. And I start there because I come from very young. My parents were in their very early 20s, working class, high school educated parents who really struggled when I was small. Now they're doing really great for themselves. They have really built a lot of success, working hard. My dad has, especially. But I started in kind of a very working class family where, I didn't have the fancy clothes and a lot of economic resources when I was a kid. And my parents didn't go to college, and they didn't necessarily push college. But I knew that the parents of friends of mine who had college educations seemed to have more financial resources and stability and job opportunities than my parents had. And so I knew really early on that college was like non-negotiable for me, and that I am pretty internally driven, and I like to learn, and I really, really wanted to be a top student. And in my high school at the time, in the late 90s, there was a really big focus on STEM. That's where I went to a rural high school. And so they were really looking at getting people professional jobs. And for them, that meant STEM jobs. This was like during the dot-com bubble and all this. And so I was in AP classes, and I did really well in high school. I was in the top 10 of my class. I was student council president and editor of my yearbook, and I was like a go-getter in high school. And I didn't really study in high school.
That's impressive.
It is. I didn't really do a whole lot. I studied for my biology classes because my teacher was really hard, Mr. Powers, and I studied for physics because she was hard, Miss Dusick. And that was like, I was going to be pre-med, I was going to go to medical school, and I was going to help people, and I was going to be a professional. That's a really linear path that I knew, a way, that's what successful people did. And so that's what I thought I needed to do. And so I went to Baylor University. Now, I went to Baylor because I was in the top of my class, so I got scholarships and a lot of financial support from Baylor. Even though it's a private school, I actually got more support from Baylor, and it made the tuition more affordable than UT, which is a public school. So just sometimes too, people think like private schools aren't within their reach, but they can be, because they may have more financial aid to provide you. So, apples to apples tuition at Baylor was like way more than at UT. But when it came down to it, I actually could afford Baylor more because I got more aid at Baylor. I didn't really know anything about Baylor. I went to Baylor because this guy I thought was cute was going to Baylor, which is super flaky, but this is where I was, right? And I knew I didn't want to go. UT was going to be kind of expensive, and it overwhelmed me a little bit to come to Austin at that moment. And I did not want to go to A&M because I knew 500 people going to A&M, and that just wasn't for me. And I would have gone to A&M and been a 2%er. I'm sorry if there's my Aggies who are listening, but that just would have happened. That's a very Texas thing, but that's, this is just kind of where I was. And those are all for me in my town in Texas, which is outside of Houston, where I grew up. Those were where people went to college. You either went to A&M or UT, and a very small percentage of people went to Baylor. And so I chose Baylor because that's where the smallest percentage of people were going. And I'm kind of a conformist that way. So I went to Baylor, which sounds kind of crazy because Baylor's a pretty conservative school, and I'm not a very conservative person. And so when I got there, and I mean conservative, not in the political sense, but just sort of in the lifestyle sense. And I got there and I felt like a fish out of water. I was really one of the only working class first generation students who was there. And so I was like, whoa, I'm way in and over my head. I was in over my head understanding college. I was in over my head understanding how these people lived. I went to their houses and I felt intimidated. I felt like, I didn't have nice enough stuff. I had a really old Ford Bronco 2 that was really beat up and it kind of smelled like fish because my parents were into fishing. And other people had like luxury cars and were joining sororities, and I couldn't afford to do that. I couldn't afford the cost. So it took me a while to kind of find my way, but I am good at making friends and I have really strong FOMO. I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. So if you're familiar with the Enneagram, it's a personality assessment, and I love it because I think it shows you kind of multidimensional, that 7s have really big FOMO. They love shiny objects. They don't want to miss out on, they want to live life as fully as possible. They have a lot of hobbies. So if you know a friend who's like taking up knitting and then suddenly they're painting and then suddenly they're reading 5 books, they're probably a 7 on the Enneagram. And so I quickly made friends and kind of found my way and found mentors. I was really good at connecting with people, but I was terrible at being a student. I was super insecure and I had no idea what I wanted to be because I very quickly realized that I did not have the discipline or the desire to be pre-med. So I just tanked my first semester in my pre-med classes. D's, struggling. I didn't fail anything because I'm charming. And I went to class.
Yeah.
I got by really far in my charm. I actually made a B in an economics class I failed everything in that class. I failed every test. I didn't do anything. I had no idea what was happening. None. I had no idea what he was talking about. I made a B in the class. You know how? Sitting in the front, talking, participating in the class, trying, and not doing anything. He gave me a B because I tried. Right? So that can go a long way. Thank you, that professor. Yeah. I don't remember his name. But so I got by on my charm and passed, but I was like phoning it in. I was super passive. And I really, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, care deeply about living a full life. Part of that's because I'm an Enneagram 7, but part of that is because I think, we're here for this short time. And like, what's the point? Well, the point is to live life and experience it. And so I want to experience life, and I wanted to then. And so I just was kind of lost, even though on the outside, I didn't look lost. There are people who are in my family and who are my friends who are listening to this right now and being like, really? She wasn't that lost. No way. She wasn't that lost. But I was really, really lost. And I got really concerned about, I prioritized being liked, acceptance, fitting in, having a boyfriend over studying, going to class, picking a major that was really for me for a lot of my college experience. And then I went and I studied abroad in Maastricht, the Netherlands, my junior year, because I had this childhood dream of going to Holland. but I don't really know where it came from. But I just, you know how when you're a kid and you're like, you pick a place you really want to go, the windmills and the tulips and the wooden shoes really called to me as a kid.
Oh, wow. That's
And so
such a unique place.
it really is.
I want to
And
go.
I really wanted to go there. And so I did. I studied abroad there and I went on a pre-med trip because I was still pre-med when I signed up for it. But then I took human anatomy and physiology at Baylor, which was like the hardest class with the hardest professor, was notorious at the time. And I took the lab and I passed out in that lab 3 times
Like
because I
actually passed out?
passed out, woke up with the whole class looking at me with a Coke can on my head. And finally the TA was like, I don't think you can be pre-med. Like, I
Oh,
think you don't have the gut. Like, you can't do it.
yeah.
Because I could learn, I liked biology. So biology never got me. It was chemistry, math, calculus, physics. Those were the classes I didn't do well in, but I did really good in biology because I like to know how humans work. I'm fascinated by humans and life. And so I didn't do well in sort of the mathy sciences, but I loved biology and I actually did well in it. In theory, I like to read about biology in a book. When I actually had to blood type somebody or I actually had to like put a frog under, I couldn't actually do it. It made me too queasy and I passed out.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized I needed to change my major. And I knew this, I had known this. I had changed from psychology to biology to classics and kept pre-med. So I had already changed my major 4 times and kept pre-med, hung on to pre-med, but I knew it was time to shed pre-med. And at the time I was classics, which is studying Greek and Roman history and languages, and pre-med.
Wow.
I liked the history.
That's so cool. You just
It was
so
really
well-rounded.
cool. Very well-rounded. And so I loved the history classes in classics. I hated the language classes and I did okay in Latin. And when it came time to take Greek, I was like, another alphabet. I have no idea what's going on. And so I shifted to history because I realized, man, history is really what I like about classics. And I actually stayed a history major and I graduated a history major and I magically graduated in 4 years because I was in a special honors program at Baylor called the Baylor Interdisciplinary Core, which sort of merged your general ed classes together. And so you had a lot of electives in your degree plan. And so I had a lot of wiggle room to do all of this, thank God. But I think when I'm telling that story, it sounds really flaky and I was bouncing around, but I think that that's important. And I think we don't get to do that enough. We feel a lot of pressure to make the right choice because we got to graduate in a certain amount of time and tuition costs a lot of money and there's pressure to get a job. But the thing about experimenting and exploring is every single time I did something, what I was doing, looking back on it with my wisdom from today, is I was refining down and figuring out what it is I liked by taking action and trying things out and trying them on. And I think sometimes that's the only way to know. The only way to know if something is for you is by figuring out and trying it on and experimenting and seeing what worked and what didn't. And I struggled because I didn't know how to manage my time because I never had to do that in high school. I just got my work done in the class before it was due and I got an A, right? Because it just wasn't that rigorous. And I didn't know how to study because I just got my work done in the class before it was due and I got an A. Or like in calculus, which I passed with a B in high school, I just goofed around and charmed the professor and was likable. And so, and so I didn't learn. And I realized that like charm and charisma can only get you so far and that I'm selling myself short and I have to learn and I have to learn how to learn and that just memorizing wasn't enough. And so I graduated and I have the questions. And so
It's
I'll
okay. You can just keep going.
I'm going to roll into the next one, which is like, how did your college experience play into what you did after college? Because it's all really, guys, until I'm about 24, it's all part of the same story. So, number one, when I was in college, I made the massive mistake of getting married my senior year of college.
Okay.
And that I did that because my parents had gotten married in their early 20s. And so I thought that's what people did. And I was at Baylor, and in Baylor in the late 90s, that was kind of a common thing people did. And, Baylor had this like, you're here to get your MRS degree, your Mrs. degree, which sounds like a million years old. It sounds like I'm an old person talking about the olden days when I say that out loud.
No, it's okay. I
That
know what you're talking about.
yeah, but that was kind of the culture. And that is not my personality, but it is absolutely not in alignment with who I am. And my grown self now, looking at that 18-year-old self, wants to be like, what were you doing?
Yeah.
You were not being true to yourself. You were not being genuine. You were not being authentic. Oh my God. And I knew it. I knew it inside. My aunt and my mother knew it and were like not being direct because they wanted to support me. So they weren't direct, but indirectly were trying to nudge me away from this.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't listen. I didn't listen to them. And I didn't listen to myself because I felt like an imposter and I felt insecure in myself. And so I listened to the outside, and that was the mistake. So by 25, I was divorced, just so you know. That dissolved because that wasn't a good choice for me. And some people get married early and it's a great choice for them. It just was not a good choice for me. And I'm trying to show that I have made big mistakes in my life.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Right?
We all have.
We all have. And the other thing I had as an experience in college that was a real hardship was when I was a sophomore, when I was a freshman, the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, I had a really bad fall. I was hiking, I was visiting my aunt, and I was hiking and I fell. And I didn't know this at the time, but I ended up rupturing my 5th lumbar disc. And I kept going to doctors, and doctors were like, oh, you're young. It's a pulled muscle. Just rest. And it was never getting better. It was getting worse and worse and worse. And finally, I saw a doctor in my hometown, and he was like, I think you have a ruptured disc. And I think it's really severe. I think you have this really rare disorder called, and I had diagnosed myself. I was like, I think I have this thing called Cauda equina syndrome. Cause I'm like, there wasn't Google at the time, but I was like researching it online.
I mean, that's what
And
you do.
right. And so I was like, I think I have this. And he was like, no, people were like, you can't diagnose yourself. And this doctor was like, oh my God, you do have this. And it's like 1% of people get this when they rupture a disc. And I had it.
No, you actually have it. Wow.
I actually had it. I was right. And so I listened to myself because people kept shutting me down on it. And I was like, no, no, no. And that experience was like, I have to listen to myself. I have to listen to myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually he gave me a referral to go to see a surgeon. And that surgeon was like, you have to have emergency surgery tomorrow morning. And I'm like, I got a test tomorrow in my chem class. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And like, no, if you don't have surgery tomorrow, you are going to be paralyzed. You have got to have surgery. And so I'm crying in the waiting room, calling my advisor, calling professors, because they had email, but we didn't really use it like we do now. And negotiating and arranging so, to be getting complete so I could have this surgery. So this happened around like the end of the semester. It was in November. And so I had this massive surgery. So the surgery and the getting married and the going to study abroad in Maastricht, I think if I had to pick like 3 really pivotal experiences in my college life, those 3 are like very, very informative of who I am and why I care so much about this particular time frame in a person's life, because I had so much misconception and lack of self-confidence and allowed so many other people to inform what I did with my life, and realized that I could have like lost my ability to walk like that,
it could have changed your whole life.
Change your whole life. And I realized and then I studied abroad and I was exposed to a broader world, and it opened up my mind. And I realized, wow, the way we grow up teenagers, the way our public high schools are, the way our media is, our movies about this time in our lives, there is a lot of mythology being perpetuated that is really damaging to the amazing personal growth and development that is happening in this time, and that we as a society aren't very nice to teenagers and college students. And I have a lot of compassion and cariño, which is like deep love for college students. And I wanted to become an advocate for them, but I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know that was a job. Like when I was in college, being an advocate for college students was like not a thing. These were like administrative jobs that you got with a high school degree to push paper. They weren't professional jobs that supported people. And so becoming an advisor or a mentor or a college success professional, those were limited jobs, but I had a lot of professors at Baylor who were really instrumental, really helpful, were there for me during all of these hardships and experiences. And I realized I want to do what these people who helped me are doing, because there needs to be more people doing this. So, because if I was kind of a train wreck, and had those people not been there, I would have been an even bigger train wreck. And had I not used them and built relationships with them, I think the thing I had going for me that other friends and other students I know miss is that I asked for help. I knew I was a train wreck and I knew that I needed help. So I built relationships and I asked for help. Had I not, I think it would have been even worse.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's so important to do that, but it can be so hard sometimes to really get yourself to ask for that help, especially when it seems like nobody else around you needs help. It's like, oh, I'm going to look weak, or I'm going to look bad if I go and try to figure this out. But it really can totally save you and change your whole experience, like it sounds like it did for you.
Yeah. So when I graduated, I loved cooking. That was some of the things I love. I still love to cook. And I thought I was still lost. I graduated with a history major and I was like, now what? What am I going to do? And people were like, what are you going to do? Teach? And I was like, well, number one, teaching. I like teaching, so maybe. But I decided to go to culinary school. And so I signed up to go. I got in at the time. There was a Cordon Bleu culinary school in Austin. There's not one anymore. I think now it's the Texas Culinary Academy. Anyway, it's different. Excuse me. Okay. It's different. Whatever it was, it's different. I signed up to go. I went to the orientation. I registered for classes. I got my chef's knives, the whole thing. And I like went to the orientation and I realized like the financial cost was going to be like, I don't know, equivalent to what I paid to go to Baylor. And that I was going to come out making minimum wage. And I was like, what am I doing?
That's crazy. I didn't know it was so expensive.
It was so expensive. And I thought, what am I doing? Do I want to be a chef in a kitchen at the Driscoll, which is a famous hotel here in Austin? Oh. That's where I attached to. And I was like, no, I don't. I just like to cook. I just want to become a better cook. I can do that on my own.
It can be a hobby.
I quit. Like I bailed, I pulled out, and I moved back to Houston where I'm from. And I went and worked as a cocktail waitress at the DoubleTree. And it was the worst job I've ever had, ever. Oh, no. And then someone was like, at the DoubleTree, you're really smart. You can get a better job if you work for a temp agency. Because this was during I graduated so I went to college when it was like the .com bubble and everyone was like, I'm going to get out and I'm going to make $70,000 a year right out of college. And people were. And then that bubble burst and people weren't. And I graduated when the bubble burst. So it wasn't as severe as the Great Recession, which happened in 08, 09. This was like 2002, but it was kind of like a mini version of that. And so I was like, no, I didn't know about temp agencies and that they connect you with jobs. So I went to a temp agency and I took all this testing that they give you there. Like, how fast can you type? And how well is your analytical skills? And what about your proofreading skills and all this? And I got a job as a receptionist at a law firm in Houston, because I was thinking maybe I'll go to law school. That's something that people with history majors do. Yeah. And I went and I worked for them and I very quickly got promoted. I got moved to a junior paralegal position and I actually really liked that work. And I thought maybe I'd go to law school, but while I was there, what I learned was I liked law and I'm interested in public policy and all those kinds of things, but I hated the culture, the work hours, the way the people were. It just like wasn't for me. It wasn't my scene. And so I wouldn't have known that. I would have just gone to law school and not actually worked at a law firm. I would not have known that I actually didn't like the culture, even though I liked the information. So that's really important. And so while I was there, I was like, I need to go back to school because I need more information because I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, somewhere in here, I also had gotten certified to teach high school. I did an alternative certification, but I couldn't get a job because I did the Baylor interdisciplinary course. So I didn't have a couple of key classes to be able to teach social studies. I could only teach history, but I couldn't teach political science or economics. And so I couldn't get a job in Texas. You have to be able to teach all of it. And in Texas, they tend to put coaches in those jobs. And I wasn't a coach. I wasn't a football coach. So that was really hard.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really hard for me to find a job.
That's tough. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so I was like, okay, now what I'm going to do. I actually like teaching. I learned through that experience. I really like teaching. I like working with students a lot. So I decided to go to grad school at the University of Houston. I went and got my master's degree in US history. And while I was there, I realized that I got a job while I was working there for a program at the University of Houston called the Scholars Community. And at the time, this was like a really revolutionary program to try to help students succeed in college. Because when I went to school, it was more about weeding you out.
Yeah.
Take that weed out class,
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah, and it's starting to shift. It's starting at this time. It was starting to shift to more retain students at all costs, help students, help at-risk students stay here. That wasn't how it always was. And
Yeah.
so this program was one of the very, very first programs that was working to do that. And I was a professional. I oversaw a team of student mentors and tutors. I trained them. I taught a college success class. I worked one-on-one with students, and I loved it, you guys. I took this job because I needed a job, and
Mhm.
someone was like, I think you'd be good at this. And I was like, okay. And I loved it. And that's how I figured out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I knew that
Yay.
that's what I was going to do. And so I decided that I didn't want to be a professor for my full job. And I went and talked to my graduate. When you go to graduate school, you get like graduate mentors. And I went and talked to them, advisors, and they were like, you're going to do what? You don't want to become a professor? You want to become like the advisor? Because at the time, it wasn't a professional job. Now you can get a master's or a PhD in this. That wasn't really a thing
Yeah.
people did when I was in grad school. There wasn't really a master's in higher ed, wasn't widespread like it is now.
Yeah.
And so they thought I was crazy, but they were supportive. So that's another place where I got some resistance. And I was like, no, this is what I need to do. And I graduated grad school with my master's degree, but I did it terminally so that I wouldn't go on to get a PhD. I decided that I can teach history in college, but I decided I wanted to be an advisor and whatever that was going to lead to. And so right out of grad school, I got a job at the University of Houston downtown, which is a part of the University of Houston system, open admission school, super at-risk students at the time. And I started being an advisor and working with students on being successful in college and registering them for classes and all that piece. And I loved it. And I've just kind of worked through ever since. I worked for uh, over 12 years here in Austin at a small liberal arts university as an advisor and administrator and instructor. And I loved it so much. And then I was just like, what's next? So
Yeah.
we can talk that. So that's how I
Then,
found.
yeah. But that is such a cool story. I'm so glad you went into detail on really all the jobs you went through, everything you went through in college, because being a college student myself, it makes me feel better knowing that, sometimes I feel like I don't know what I want to do with my life, and seeing that now you're so successful and you have this podcast and business that you are passionate about. I mean, it can all work out, and sometimes it seems to work out when you least expect it too. It sounds like when you found your love for, helping college students, that was just, you said, a job that you just, someone said you should take this job and you did it, but you didn't know it would actually lead to this. So that's awesome. And that does lead me into my next question. So after all of this experience working with college students, finding what you love, you decided to start Collegehood Advice. So I kind of wanted to get into what made you take that leap and start this podcast and this business that you have, and kind of leave your other job behind.
Yeah. So one of the themes from my story that I'd like to pull out that I think is really important is that you'll notice that I was like, well, people started giving me a hard time. People started giving me a hard time. People started saying why, and naysaying me. And I quickly realized that anytime I really felt like I needed to do something and people around me, it made them nervous and they started telling me why it wasn't going to work. This just might be my contrarian nature, but I always like, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I need to
Yeah.
do. And I used it as a sign instead of a deterrent. And that's important to this story because it comes into play again. It's an important theme. So I had gotten to, when I was at the University of Houston in my first advising job, I had a colleague, her name is Jen. I love you, Jen, if you're listening. And I really looked up to her. She's about 6 years older than me. And I really looked up to like every part of her life. She had moved to Texas she had moved to Houston from Austin. And while her background had been like, she was an advisor, but she also was an adjunct professor. So she taught a couple of history classes, and she also was a really good knitter. And I was like, I want to be able to knit, and I want a job where I advise students and also teach classes. Like, it was that specific.
Sounds like a dream.
Right? I was like, this sounds amazing. I want to be just like Jen when I grow up, because I'm still in my early 20s. I'm maybe 24 at this point. And I'm like, I got to figure out what I'm doing, and I'm clearly not becoming a full professor. So I want to be like Jen, because she's got it all. She's got a master's degree in history too. So she had the same education as me, similar personality. I think her birthday is the day before mine. So I'm like, we're just like Jen, but 6 years older. So I really looked up to her, and I had this as my vision, and I was like, but I'm never going to be able to teach classes and be an advisor. Who's going to hire me? Right. All that negative self-talk. And I moved through my life. Things changed. And at around 27, when I graduated, 28, I decided I was going to move to Austin. I was in a new relationship, and now he's my husband. He lived in Waco. I had already done my time in Waco when I went to Baylor, and I didn't want to go back. Waco was not cool when I was there during this time. It was pre-Chip and Joanna Gaines. Changed a lot.
That has really changed it.
Waco is really different now. And so it wasn't what it was now, and I was not going back. And so I moved to Austin, because at the time you could get from South Austin to Waco in like an hour and 15 minutes. Now it would take you 3 hours, because Austin's grown so much. And Waco's grown so much. But you used to be able to get there pretty easily. And so I decided to move to Austin, and a friend of mine who lives here, who is a really big cheerleader, kept sending me jobs, sending me jobs. And I actually applied for 2. I applied for 1, and I got an interview. And in the middle of the interview, I was like, it was wrong. I would research the office I wanted to work. I knew where I wanted to work. I knew the office I wanted to work in. I knew the job I wanted. And I had gotten confused. And I was like in an interview for a different job on the campus, working with adult students. And I got the interview, and the woman was like, tell me what you know, why you want to work for our department. And I launched into this whole thing about the other department, by the way. And she just stopped, and she said, that's really our academic support services office. This job is in New College. And I go, it's not an academic support services? And she was like, no. And I was like, I'm going to stop the interview. I don't want this position.
Oh my gosh. I love that. You just said, I'm going to stop the interview now. Sorry.
So if you guys have learned anything about me, I'm okay with looking foolish.
No, but that's so inspiring. I think more of us need to have that kind of confidence.
I default to kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to go with that.
Hey, that's okay. Nobody does.
Right? Nobody does. So I bowed out, and I'm so glad I did. But then I felt like a fool, right? I was so embarrassed, and I was like, I missed my chance. I'm never getting a job in Austin. Yeah. And my friend maybe 2 weeks later said, the job you really want is open. And I applied, and I interviewed, and they invited me to campus, and they offered me the job. And I worked in that job for 10 years, and I loved it. Those people were my family. I loved working with students. It was amazing. I learned so much. I really got a lot of who I am in this work from there. And I had an opportunity. I really wanted to start my own thing, and I was going to leave to do it. And I went and let my supervisor know I was going to be leaving. And she was like, wait, there's an opportunity coming. Please don't resign yet. Just wait until we announce this opportunity. And I'm only telling you this because I don't want you to quit and miss this opportunity, but just hold off for a couple weeks, will you? And I just like, okay, I will. And so they posted a job for associate director positions 3. And there had never been that position at the university before. I didn't really see a ladder. And so this position came open, I applied for it, and I happened to get one of them, and I was so excited. And so I put this dream of doing Collegehood on hold, because I thought it made more sense and it was safer to become an associate director. I'm glad I did that, because there was even, so at the time I felt like I flaked on my dream, but what I realized was it wasn't time yet. I needed more experience and confidence and wisdom before I could do this. And so I learned a lot. I did programming, I remodeled a department, I supervised people. Like I got really good mentoring. I learned so much that I think is giving me a lot of credibility and stature to do this work and to take this work where I want to take it. I wouldn't have the experience, quite honestly, to do it if I hadn't have taken that pit stop as an associate director. But about 3 years in of being an associate director, maybe 2 years in, I was kind of feeling burnt out, and I was moving further away from students and more towards like sitting at meetings with administrators, talking about students in theory, and creating programs that didn't really serve students, but served the needs and metrics of the university. And because the university has to measure if the thing is working, that not always the metrics that really impact students are measurable. And I got really frustrated by that. And I understand, I have a lot of compassion for universities, and that's what they have to do. And their focus is on the whole of a class, not each individual student. And they have a lot of really great things that they're doing, but I felt limited in my ability to be creative. And I felt like if I got outside of the system of college, I could be a resource for colleges, and I can move more nimbly and more creatively than if I was inside one college. So I decided that I wanted to leave, and I was going to start a podcast, and I didn't really know what that was going to look like. And people looked at me like I was crazy, and I had 3 heads, and were like, how are you going to make money? You're going to leave your job. Because I had lived my dream.
Yeah.
I had a job. I learned how to knit. I was teaching classes. I had achieved it.
So you were actually just like your friend Jen.
I was just like my friend Jen, and I went up to Jen because I didn't stop at advisor. I got associate director, right? So I had gotten a promotion too, and I was like, I have made my goals. I looked around and I was like, I achieved all my goals, and I'm 32. 30.
No.
What now? And I looked around to the other administrators at the table who were 20 years older than me, and I was like, oh, is this my future? Ooh, I don't know about this, and I thought, and I decided that, I'm young enough that I have to do this. And it made people were like, you're going to leave your job? How are you going to get paid? What are you going to do? People don't listen to podcasts. What are you talking about? Are you sure you want to start with a podcast? And I was like, no, it needs to be a podcast. I'm going to do a podcast. I didn't want to start with YouTube. I'm going to start with a podcast. I think that's a better medium for me. I'm going to start with a podcast. I'm going to do it. Do you know how to do a podcast? Nope. I have no idea how to do a podcast. I'll figure it out. And I did. And I actually quit my full-time job and got a part-time job as a professor, as an instructor, just to pay my bills. And I saved money. I paid down bills. I had some help from my family, financial support from my family. And I went for it. And here I am.
And here you are.
And here I am. And I'm still figuring it out. Like monetizing an online business is really challenging.
Oh, yeah.
Getting support for the podcast is really challenging. I'm still figuring it out. I haven't figured it all out yet. But it's here. This podcast is 100 episodes in. I have been. It's been about 2.5 years of work, and I'm happy with where I am, I think.
Yes. No, it's awesome. And it's so inspiring that you've kept going, because I know for me, I also have a podcast, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just, picking up a microphone and talking and posting it on the internet and you're done. There's a lot of work behind it, and it can be hard at first, especially trying to grow and get an audience and all those things you were talking about. And so the fact that you've stuck with it, and it's so clear that you're so passionate about it too, that is just really inspiring to see. So that also kind of leads me into my next question, which, just out of curiosity, what has been your favorite part of doing this podcast? I know you've talked a little bit about some of the challenges, but what has it really brought you that you've just loved?
I love how many people I get to connect with. So when I resigned, my boss, who is a mentor and friend, was like, I'm really concerned about you. You're pretty extroverted. Are you sure you want to work from home by yourself and do a podcast? Like, are you sure that this fits your personality? Because remember, one of the themes of my story is I built relationships, I connected with people, I talked to people, I asked for help, I built a community, I made friends. And so the thought that I was going to like work from home by myself behind a computer screen was kind of scary to me. And it was also one of the things that people in my world were really concerned about. And I have to say, I have connected with more people in this capacity than I would ever get to if I had stayed in my role. And that's probably the most rewarding thing. I was thinking about it earlier today about like, what is it that I am trying to do here?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do, I think, three things. I'm trying to have high quality resources and advice and guidance accessible to students regardless of where they are. I'm trying to provide resources that are affordable that could help support the work of those educators who are doing the work of supporting students on their own campuses. And I'm trying to amplify and share voices of people who are trying to make the world a better place with their message. And if that message is really important for students to hear, I'm trying to amplify those voices.
Yeah.
Those are the goals. And that's where the reward is. And that reward comes from building a network of people, building a community, you know, talking to you and getting to know you and every guest that's come on the show. I'm doing my challenge this week. At the time of this recording, it's the Best Semester Ever Challenge. And, you know, that you get to meet students from all over the place and that's amazing and hear their stories. And I think the fact that you can create something and put it on the internet and whoever needs to hear it gets to hear it and then they get to interact with you about it is magical. And that's what's rewarding. Now, there are bad parts of that too, but I tune those things out.
Yeah.
You know?
No,
like,
of course you have to.
You have to, I treat them like the naysayers, like I'm on the right path.
You are.
I'm triggering people. But for the most part, most people, 99% of people who are interacting with me are really getting a lot out of this, I think. And that's amazing to me. And I feel really humbled by that.
Yes. No, I can speak for myself. Like, it's just so nice to have someone. I mean, we don't live near each other. We're, in different places, and the internet and this podcast connects us. And I know that whenever I need a little bit of advice for how to get through college, I can just turn on one of your episodes and instantly feel like I'm talking to someone I've known forever, someone who's really a mentor for me. So I think it's so awesome what you're doing. I know I've said that like 10 times, but I am just going to keep saying it because it's really awesome. And I'm so glad you get to connect with so many people too. And with that, this is kind of diverging from the whole podcast thing for a second, but I would just be curious because you said you have made so many great connections with college students through this podcast that you probably wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Have you found that there are similar challenges or similar issues that a lot of college students are facing today that you're trying to really talk about through this podcast, that you're trying to bring awareness to? And also, do you think those are similar to some of those challenges you were facing in college, or have things kind of shifted?
Yes. And I have worked with, I realized in my capacity, so I don't really know how many listeners. It's hard to get a real firm number on how many listeners you have, but I know it's in the thousands. And I know that it's international. I know that there's like 30 or more people across countries that are represented in my analytics. And so, I mean, I want it to be, of course, in the tens of thousands or millions, right?
Yeah, of course.
But if I was talking to a room of students and I had 10 students show up, I'd be like, yeah. So I try to think about that, right? Or if I had 30 students show up to my workshop, I would be like going through the roof with excitement. And so to have thousands of people hear an episode of a podcast is like amazing to me. And so I think in this world of online media, we think we need thousands and thousands or tens of thousands or millions of downloads, likes, followers, whatever, to have an impact. And what I do to not get sucked into that is remember, like, if we didn't have I can remember when we didn't have all this stuff, and then that if you got to impact like 3 people, that was pretty cool. And so I try to stay grounded there. Like if this was in real life and you got to impact 100 people, man, you would feel really amazing, right?
Yeah.
So that's a little aside. In the 12 years that I was an advisor, I had figured out that I had helped, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 students. And this is before the podcast, from every continent but Antarctica.
Well, that's pretty good.
Right? Because
Yeah.
for a time, I worked with a lot of international students.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And I've worked at a private, fairly affluent liberal arts university, and I've worked at a inner city open admissions university, serving the community at large. And I've worked with traditionally aged 18-year-old students, and I've worked with non-traditionally aged folks who are just trying to lift up their life. And so I've worked with very diverse amount of students in my life and career. And I have to say that at the end of the day, there are differences and challenges, like what people's internal obstacles and challenges are in their life, depending on socioeconomic status and region and country of origin. Those challenges can be different. But what we are all developmentally struggling with inside the college experience itself is kind of the same. And it was the same for me. And what I see as like my major themes, and you might, now that I'm going to tell you this, you'll see it in my posts and the things I offer and in the podcast selection.
Yeah.
I see kind of like 5 categories where students struggle. One, probably the top, is our like confidence and belief in ourselves. And within that, I feel like that's our purpose, right? I put that as like the major purpose category. And within that category lives motivation, self-confidence, asking for help, all of the mental health, like all of those kind of topics live in that one for me. Because I find that a lot of us grown-ups, students, are under a really big mythology. And I say this all the time in the podcast, and this is kind of what I'm going to speak on. I want to write a book on, I want to teach on, that our purpose is what we do or outside of us, or something beyond, something fancier than I think it is. As a person who studies history and seeing all the diversity I've seen in the world and different cultures around work, and also what kind of access over time people have had to work and the freedom to choose their work, I cannot believe that our work is connected to our purpose, right? And you always hear, do work in your purpose, do work in your purpose, live your purpose, right? I cannot believe that all of the women who didn't have access to work did not have a purpose. All of the people in humanity that were enslaved did not have a purpose. I can't believe that.
Right.
So what I have landed on through my study of history and my working with so many students from so many backgrounds from across the world is the fact that we exist is our purpose.
Yeah.
And each and every single one of us has our own perspective and experiences and skills and natural gifts and talents. And that is our purpose. Our purpose is to know that and understand that, and to carry those things with us to do the highest good in the world. And if that's the case, then it makes me feel better. So it might just be coming from a selfish place. If that makes me feel better, I feel a lot better about that, because then I know that if I have in a human experience that didn't give me the freedom to do work or contribute my skills that in a way that is on purpose, then I know that I still get to keep my purpose, even if the external circumstances don't allow me to live in a way that's like live out in my work in a way that's on purpose. So the way I think about it is that you have your purpose, and then you use you to live either in alignment with that, or you choose not to live in alignment with that. And when you're not in alignment with that, that's when you're like choosing things because other people told you to, or because you need to get a job and you don't really like it, but it pays you well, or you don't really know, you really like secretly want to do this thing, but you probably need to pick this because it's more practical. Like, right. That's all not living on purpose. Living on purpose is, I really want to start a podcast. And I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm going to start it. And I realize I have to pay my bills. And so I need to do take care of my business. I need to get a part-time job. I need to, reduce my bills, and I need to do things to make it possible for me to do this and be on purpose. But I need to live on purpose. And so that is like the core mission of this is to help students feel empowered to embrace and love themselves and their own purpose, and help them understand who they are, what they bring to the table, how they hone their skills, how they develop them, and how they use the experience of college to develop themselves personally and professionally.
Right.
All college does lead to jobs and opportunities. It doesn't have to. It's not the only way. I know a lot of people who are quite successful without it, but it is a major way for a lot of opportunities. It is an easier way in some ways. But what it is an opportunity for you to build out you. Understand who you are, understand what you like, understand what you care about, understand what you're good at, find people to support and mentor you, experiment, refine, take first steps in a safe environment that nurtures you, learn things, right? So that's the primary. So I think of it as like, that's the objective of collegehood. And then everything else underneath that is serving that objective. So time management. If you don't have good time management, and you can't organize yourself, and you don't have good discipline, it's going to be really hard to personally and professionally develop yourself during college.
Very true.
Right? If you don't know how to learn, it's going to be really hard to professionally develop yourself.
Yes, exactly.
If you don't know what opportunities are there for you and how to access them, and examples of what other people have done and have been exposed to what's possible, it's going to be really hard for you to figure out what your options are.
Yes.
Right.
Very true.
Right. If you don't know how to ask for help or get an informational interview, or what kind of things are available for you to develop yourself, it's going to be hard for you to develop yourself. And so the purpose of Collegehood is to empower you to have that information so that you can thrive during college. And by thrive during college, I mean, so you can get your maximum investment in this experience by personally and professionally developing your skills, your habits, your systems, your experiences, your relationships that you can take with you anytime you are doing work in the world. So, because your work in the world is going to change, your circumstances, roles are going to change. So the goal here isn't to pick the right one that you're going to do for the rest of your life. It's to develop you so that when that one isn't for you anymore, you can pivot. And when this one didn't work out, you can pivot. And when you want to be a mom now, you can pivot and then you can come back. Or when you need to take care of your sick parent, you can do that and then you can come back. That you can take those skill sets with you from place to place and have a full life that's in alignment with you. That is the mission.
I love that. And I think it's such a good point to say that college is more about developing yourself than going through like a set of decisions, because I think being in college, sometimes it can feel like you just have to get to this one end goal. Like, okay, I have to choose my major. I have to get this job. I have to decide what to do with the rest of my life. And I think it's great that you're promoting more of just developing yourself for whatever your future holds, rather than just focusing on those decisions. And like you said, they're not going to really affect your whole life usually. One decision isn't going to change your whole, the rest of your life usually. I mean, I don't know, there are some, but college is more about developing and growing as a person than just making those decisions. So I think that's awesome. And I think it's hard for people to kind of, navigate all that sometimes, which is why you're here. And I think definitely in college, it feels like I always say this on my podcast, it feels like a lot of people have it all together. People are just very easily making these decisions and just growing perfectly, and nobody's struggling and nobody needs this advice. And it really helps to hear you say that. So thank you, because it's good to know I'm not alone.
You are not alone.
Anyway, I also kind of wanted to jump into just I think a lot of students my age, but it seems like people all ages they really want to do something like you've done, starting a podcast, starting a business. I mean, there's so many ways you can put yourself out there and do something big like you have done. And I know a lot of my friends and people just in college who want to take that step, and they're just kind of scared to actually do something that might be off the path that seems to be normal and right. And they don't really know how to put themselves out there. And I struggle with that too. And so I would just ask, do you have any advice for other people who maybe want to do something like you've done, whether it's starting a podcast or just expressing themselves in some way, but they might be a little scared to do it?
Yeah, I struggle with it too, you guys. I had a whole thing in like December and November. Was like, I'm going to have to go apply for a job. What am I doing? Does anybody care about this podcast? Like, I still, this is part of it. Anytime you're putting yourself out there, it's being vulnerable, and you have to be brave to be vulnerable, and it's scary. I think that this is such a magical time. I said this before, the fact that you can serve the world in this way is so amazing to me. And I don't think you have to have millions of followers to have really great impact. I think you can have, like I said, 10 followers, 100 followers, and have really huge impact. And I think that we shouldn't dismiss those impacts. I think that's pretty amazing. The fact that you can do a podcast or do YouTube, I think anytime you're going to do these kinds of things, it cannot come from a place of, I want to make easy money and be really big. Yeah. If it comes from that place, then it's going to make it really stressful and difficult, and it's going to be hard to weather the storm. You don't have control over how many followers you have. You don't have control over your timeline or how long it takes for you to get listens, and it could take a long time, right? By this mark, I thought it would have like tens of thousands of followers. Yeah. I don't, right? I want them, right. but I'm not where I thought it would be, but I'm still successful, right? To my point about like how you determine success. So I think all to say, I would start a YouTube channel or a podcast or an Instagram influencer. If you have something to say, something to share, something to make that you want others to be able to access, then do it. The stakes are low. I mean, don't sell all your assets and like have no side job and no job and all that. Don't be irresponsible, right? Take care of your business and your human needs, because if you don't, you're going to come from this place of like desperation, and you're going to seem like, I need you to do this. And you're going to turn people off. Your energy is going to turn people off. And so you have to like take your time and do your homework, have a job, even like a practical job, and start to do this. Even while you're in school, start to do this, because it takes time to get traction. So my advice to anyone is, there is more information and opportunity for you to be you and do work that's on purpose than any other moment in all of human history.
Wow.
That's pretty lucky.
Yeah.
And so you might as well take little actions within the sphere of your influence in this moment. Your future self will know what to do. Right. Your future self will know what to do. If I told my 18-year-old self that I was going to start a company called Collegehood, where I helped college students, and I had a podcast and a YouTube channel and all this stuff, my head would have exploded. My 18-year-old self could not understand this. One, it didn't exist. So I would have been like, what?
Yeah.
And smartphones didn't exist. YouTube didn't exist. Podcasts didn't exist.
Like, what's that?
So that shows you, in just my life, all those things have changed everything. So you have no idea in your life what's going to come, which is why you can't focus on one specific job.
That's very true. You can't. You never know what's coming.
You don't know what's coming. And how exciting. Like, the smartphone has transformed the world. It's transformed everything. That didn't exist when I was in college. It didn't exist for the first 10 years I worked with students. Almost.
I can't imagine how you couldn't just go on Google and find answers to like homework problems, or, I feel like as a college student, I can't live without a smartphone or the internet. So I give you big props for getting through it.
I went to the computer lab, guys.
Ooh, fun.
Right? Like, this is how this used to work. I went to internet cafes in Europe. Like, I used a calling card to call home, right? Like, this is the world. I didn't get a I don't even think I had a cell phone in college.
Yeah.
So that's, the world can change very quickly. I'm not that old. I'm not that old.
No, you're not.
The world can change really quickly. And so I would say that all to say, do it. What do you have to lose?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I think I've been thinking as I've been going through this, like, instead of dwelling on like the negative or what could go wrong, think about what could go right and the best that could come out of this. And even if you don't get the number of followers you want, or you don't reach the number of people you want to, I mean, the fact that you're trying says a lot, I think, and it'll help you, even if it's not what you do for the rest of your life, it'll help you with, like you're kind of saying, living out your purpose and developing and growing into whoever you're meant to be, I guess. So I totally agree with that. Yes.
Well, and now there's starting to be jobs that didn't exist. Social media managers, podcast producers, YouTube producers at every company, everyone, because everyone needs these things. Those are becoming jobs, right? Like another podcaster I know has applied for a part-time job as a podcast producer at a pretty amazing place. And so there weren't, you couldn't be a social media manager when I went to college, folks.
Yeah.
You couldn't be an environmental sustainability officer when I went to college. Like, there's jobs that didn't even exist that exist now.
Did not. It's crazy. I will look at jobs sometimes and be like, I don't even know what this is, but it sounds cool.
Right.
The world is changing so fast. So
the world is changing so fast.
Crazy.
And so the thing is like, I like to point out, and I'm just take a quick moment to point this out, that when we're young, when we're teenager, early adult, emerging adult, we are more likely to take risks and be impulsive and spontaneous. And that we get a bad rap for that, because you're like, irresponsible teenager, irresponsible young adult. You have evolved that way because you had to take risks to like find your own family, create your own family, find your own places to live. And what's happened in our culture is unhealthy risks, like getting messed up, using too much substances, not sleeping, driving like a maniac, being on your phone all the time. Those risks are glamorous and glorified, and everyone does them and doesn't even think twice. And every single one of those things I mentioned might be fun in moderation or not, but they all could actually really, truly kill you. Really take your life or really harm you. And a lot of people don't think twice about doing those risks.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like,
so I recommend trading unhealthy risks for healthy risks, like send yourself a YouTube channel.
Yes.
That's not going to kill you.
Yes, hopefully not. As long as you keep some level of privacy, then.
As long as you keep some level of privacy.
Yes.
And you are coming from a place of love and compassion. It's a social risk, but it's not a actual harmful risk in the same way that a lot of things that young adults do are. So I would, just think about that. Like, if you're nervous to be yourself, but you are okay with getting in a car with a drunk driver or texting while you're driving, then you need to, like, sorry to be preachy and momish here, but like, think about that. That seems ridiculous. Doesn't make sense. I encourage you, I invite you lovingly, I'm nudging you lovingly to reevaluate that and think about that. Because you are predisposed to take risks. Just make sure you're taking the right ones.
Thank you so much, Katy, for letting me be your guest host today. I thought I would just end this off with one more question just for fun, so everyone can leave here with a little tidbit, a little piece of knowledge to get them through the rest of their day. And that would be, this is a hard question, I know, because you give so much great advice to college students, but if you could only give one piece of advice to a college student listening to this podcast right now, what would it be?
Be yourself.
I love that.
If you're just yourself, if you believe that your purpose is to just be yourself, and even if you don't know yourself 100%, because you're always becoming yourself every single day. But if you use yourself as your litmus test and you stay in alignment with that, then everything else is helping support that, right? That's the most important thing. Yeah, is to be yourself.
It really is. I totally agree. It can be hard, but it's so worth it if you just do it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate that advice and everything. It was so fun interviewing you, and I really hope everyone enjoyed this episode. I feel kind of weird saying that because this is your podcast, so you're probably going to say something else, but thank you for listening. And Katie, is there anything else you want to add?
Just thank you, Meredith, for agreeing to do this. Thank you for coming up with these thoughtful questions. Thank you to everybody who's listening and indulging me as I rambled on. I want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing with your friends. Thank you for help support and grow this podcast. We couldn't get to 100 episodes without you. This is what it's about. It's about serving you. So thank you for being part of this and allowing me to support you while you are thriving during college.